today. Julia, I'm really excited to dive into your story, a little bit of how you kind of got into your role. Thankful that you've been just a great partner for our team in many different ways. I feel like we were doing a little history trip down the history row here before we hit record, and just yeah, your involvement with our team has been really fun, and it just felt like we needed to get on and share your story a little bit. So appreciate you being on with us.
I appreciate you guys. Like you said, it's been a long time partnership, and at every phase of your existence and my professional existence, it's definitely taken, different personalities, and every layer has just been so great. So I'm happy to be here, happy to be a part of this partnership with y'all.
Well, I feel like that's just another good opportunity to realize of like when you stay connected through just change of either career or roles or companies, like, yeah, it's just fun when you can look back and say like, oh, just the thread of relationships is what kind of keeps you together. So, I want to dive into it and really get into a little bit of how you got into your role today. I feel like the title of solutions architect, I've seen it kind of pop up a little bit more, which I think is really exciting. We've kind of like on our team really started to see that role pop up a little bit more. And I think it's just a unique role similar to a lot of AI stuff that's coming out, a lot of just new titles that we hear often. So that's really what I wanted to dive into maybe first is kind of how you got into the role that you're in with Fly Guys. And then we'll kind of take another trip down just I think the topic of just education and really democratization of data. I think you explained it really well before we hit record again. I was like, stop, let's hit record. We got to dive into that. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about your history, how you got into your role, and we'll dive in.
Absolutely. So I graduated college with my master's in architecture. Never made it into an architecture firm. Did a few internships and decided it wasn't for me, and immediately jumped into general contracting. So I joined a construction company with the VDC team. I found that the VDC team was a good translator, somebody who kind of knew a little bit about everything, but had a technical edge where I could collect the models from different players, the engineer, the architect, federate that model and help communicate it to different teams. And through that, I just naturally fell into data collection. We started with some laser scanners on the ground, a couple of little Leicas or Pharaohs, and then started advancing, saying, this Phantom 4, it's not that expensive. Maybe we could just do a couple of images, take some aerial views. And it was incumbent upon me as the employee to say, okay, we've got somebody who's specializing in 3D printing and, as built evaluation. And then we need somebody who's doing the reality capture portion. And I raised my hand and actually immediately found you all and Struction Site at the time. So that was a huge education component for me, thinking I was just going to fly a drone and take a couple pictures to realize that I could actually produce a truly federated map. And in tandem with my survey team, we were creating incredibly valid and accurate data. So that ramped up incredibly quick. We started with one Phantom 4 and ended up with, I think, maybe six and, RTK and sort of take that edge. And then I progressed into engineering. So I moved on to an engineering firm, about 10,000, 11,000 people, so a very large company, where I was able to just stretch my wings a little bit more on the reality data capture side as far as managing a fleet and a team. And I found that a lot of that job was communicating and selling internally, going to each job site and getting labeled the carpet walker who's showing up with some stuff that they have to do, and then transferring into, hey, this actually, we can take this component here and it can go into your Procore world and it can be a part of your daily log. Or, hey, I know this cut fill or you're counting trucks. Let's talk volume now. And after maybe 5 or 6 use cases, it started to really ramp up and happen as grassroots where, PMs were reaching out to me instead of me showing up and saying, "Please let me fly your site." And the team there I stood up was a team of surveyors, so all of our pilots ended up being surveyors. Then cue Fly Guys. I was at Black& and Beach. They came in, they, introduced themselves and said, "We wanna help you fly." And I said, "Absolutely not. I have my own program. I don't need you. I'm not interested." Quality was a big concern of mine, especially being at such a large company with a lot of red tape and rightfully so. High fidelity clients that I needed to make sure that we're secure. I wasn't willing to go into, a Fly Guy situation, but ultimately they convinced me, not only from the fact that I didn't have the full scale across the United States that I needed, but also that, I alone could not sell to all these individuals internally. I, as a background in architecture and from my journey, I needed different perspectives. I needed an engineer who had already been convinced and a contractor and different voices. And Fly Guys kind of proposed that or assisted me with that. So then I came over here. Now I started as the director of premium services, managing on the operations side. realized that, again, the translation between the client all the way to the pilot just wasn't necessarily happening in the way that I felt was really doing respect to the pilot and to their data, really getting them everything they needed. So I recently transitioned in the last 6 months to the solutions architect role, which is on the front end of scoping and understanding, not just saying, okay, you want a map and you want it flown at this accuracy, but saying, how exactly are you utilizing that data? How are you looking at it on the back end? What are you looking for? Are you looking for anomalies or cut fill or comparison? And then matching them with the appropriate tool. Maybe half the time you have somebody who already has a team and they're ready to go and they're ready to just ingest a file, whether it's a contours file or an LAS or something like that. Then 50% of the time you have someone who just says, can't you just produce it and give it to me and me just understand it and know it? And the answer is yes, but it's finding the right tool for the right scenario. So that's the majority of my role now is ensuring that I'm protecting the pilot's best interest, but also the scope and the client's best interest, almost like a internal owner's rep for FlyGuys.
Yeah. So cool to hear. I think so many questions and follow-ups that I have. One, even knowing some of the pieces of that story, but also just kind of the way in which maybe the path kind of laid itself out. Like, the first question I had was, like, how did Fly Guys get introduced to Black& Beach? Like, what were you reaching out to them? Did they kind of reach out? Like, 'cause interesting that that was such an inflection point, and even I definitely wanna dive into the idea that you had too of like, "Hey, like, I wanna do this on my own." Like, there's a ton of value that because there's a lot to unpack there, but yeah, how did Fly Guys get introduced to Black& Beach? Was that something that you had looked for or that they had kinda reached out?
No, they sold me on it entirely. Actually, Jessica over here, the longest standing employee at FlyGuys, she reached out. I think she had been cold calling them for a little while. They had done some missions together because ultimately, with a company so large, if you find the right PM, you can get your foot in the door, but you might not go through the entirety of the whole vendor approval process. So FlyGuys was kind of in that state where they were onesie twosie performing for different job sites that already trusted them and knew they were a good partner because they didn't know I existed or we didn't know that their own program existed. So, when they reached out and said, actually at your conference, they said, "Hey, we're all going to be at Drone Deploy this year. Let's meet and have breakfast." And the pitch that they gave me, they were already flying with me, but the pitch that they gave me was just so much more comprehensive than just having some guy with a drone that I don't know out on my job site.
Mm.
That there was layers of operational excellence and compliance and records and software that was really laying a more of a foundation than I ever would have suspected. And additionally, I was so stuck. I had pushed so hard. It's an act of Congress to get something moved through a 10,000 person company. And again, rightfully so. You don't want people doing things ad hoc. But as one individual, I was, writing business use cases and trying to get new equipment. I think I had purchased a couple in 300s and a Wingtra, and I had kind of been capped. So I couldn't get additional equipment that I knew I needed. So they were kind of supplementing outside of my budget so that I could have them on individual sites as I needed because I was limited by my own industry or my own company, really.
Where do you think a lot of your kind of, lack of interest with their type of service came from? Like, was it something that you had kind of I mean, that's maybe a personal question too, but, like, what were the things that kind of, like, laid that groundwork of, like, "No, like, I think I can do this on my own. I think that I can really, like, push internally," like, coming from the smaller well, not smaller, but just the different type of contractor from, before, like, did you kind of think some of it came from that? Or, yeah, just kinda curious of, like, what laid that groundwork of, "Hey, I wanna keep white knuckling this thing because we hear that a ton from folks of, hey, if you're kinda stuck in your ways and maybe don't think creatively outside the box, you're probably not gonna get too much out of the box."
Yeah, no, I think it was a control issue. Part of it was that, like you're saying, McCown Gordon gave me a lot of leadway, a lot of rope to do whatever I needed to do. And I felt that, with the partnerships and the strategies that I had uncovered, that I could just do it. That if I was given the right budget and if I, gave them the right business plan, that they would just see that you're not just collecting data, you're not just saving money and you're reducing risk, but you're also saving lives and you're producing this timeless deliverable that will assist us all. So I think that a part of it was just that I had a lot of self-confidence. I felt that there was a lot of snake oil salesmen out there. There's so many people in this industry and it's so fresh. It makes it very difficult to identify who's real and who's not,
Mm.
who's to be trusted. And I just didn't trust anybody. I was not willing to. I had so many different software vendors and hardware vendors and different people who were trying to make their way for the first time and sell me on it as a big client. So as a big client, I was just very opposed to anything that I felt was, gonna hitch my wagon to something that might not be here in a couple years. So, it had nothing to do with Fly Guys. I had turned down everybody, honestly, I was not interested, but at the end of the day, I realized, okay, if I can keep an eye on them and have the compliance and the QC that I need, then maybe this will be okay. And in the end, they ended up having the compliance and the QC that I needed anyways, so that was honestly taken off my plate to begin with.
I chuckle because I resonate with a lot of what you said. Like, I remember starting some of those initiatives too. Service provider side from either like the laser scanning, terrestrial side of it to the aerial capture, like, yeah, and I probably too wouldn't have like labeled it as control, more so of just like kind of this thought that like, "Oh, I can just handle it on my own," until you can't, or until you hit what you said, like those roadblocks too. And Brian, I know I've already reached my question quota before I turn it over to you, but yeah, like, um, I have a ton more thoughts and questions too. But Brian, yeah, what do you want to chime in here with?
No, I mean, I think you bring up such a good point, especially on like the amount of time it takes not just to do the flight, but to also QA/QC, make sure the checklists are filled out, all the paperwork. Like, there's a lot more that goes into it. But I'm really curious at you notice a sweet spot and where organizations start to where they start to break. Like, is there a scale issue? Any insight on that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it for sure depends on the industry. If we're talking specifically about construction, I found that the biggest hurdle with adoption is not only the overhead cost, because cost isn't really that huge of a difference in construction, but at the end of the day, you're investing in assets that are going to depreciate, and if they're not being utilized, they're sitting on the shelf, and that's money sitting on the shelf. But I found that it's finding the individual that has time as a priority that usually these companies want to bake it into somebody's job instead of hiring. They don't want to hire a drone guy because then they have to manage a drone guy or a drone team. Like I was, where I was, that's, my full time gig. I'm trying to figure out where the equipment is, where the pilots are, who's requesting more, what we can actually do. I think the ceiling kind of ends up, and again, it depends. Once you have, more than let's say 3 drones or if you're mapping in such a consistent volume that it makes it very difficult to keep up, I find that the data will always take a back seat because these people have full-time jobs that they need to complete. So it kinda depends on the buy-in of the company, but I would say once you have I think everybody should have a drone in-house. Everybody should have an M3E or, an Air 2S or something in-house that they can take pictures with. I think that once you kind of advance beyond taking pictures and go into, like, a mapping scale, when, you have maybe 2, 3 drones, then you kind of get into the space of, "I need software, I need a drone overhead, I need a person who's gonna fly it consistently, and I need them to be in the right location." So a handful of drones might not be too bad, but after you get a full operation going and you say, "Hey, I wanna have every site flown," then you've completely outscoped yourself as far as a construction company may go because you don't have, surveyor Joey on the block doesn't have time to jump from this to this. He has his full-time job as a surveyor. And again, additionally, his superintendent may not be totally bought in on the drone thing. So it might not even be his priority at all, even if the powers that be are saying so. So I would say any scale, you could always use drone services like ourselves or reality capture services. But I would say that, once you get past 3 or 4 drones, or if you're doing mapping, you probably want to engage with somebody who knows what they're doing or has a GIS background to level you up in that area.
I
Yeah.
think it's interesting too. Like, oh, go for it, Brian.
No, I was gonna say, I think that's a great point. Anytime someone is expecting the data on a somewhat semi-consistent basis, and you can't have that take a backseat because there was a rain day, and one day one day of rain could mess with that person's schedule, say, "Hey, we're gonna have to miss it this week." So I guess anytime you hit a roadblock like that, okay, that's a great point.
I feel like this is a good opportunity for. I need like a little jingle of like Grant's worst analogies, like when I play my button here. But it's like as you were explaining it, what the thought that came to mind was like you get the fire started, and you can either like choose to go into the woods and like keep chopping down wood and like bringing it back to the fire, or it's like, hey, I'm just gonna buy this bushel. Like this bushel is gonna like help sustain and like keep these things going. And it's such a challenge to like. Brian's laughing over there. I get it, Brian. It's a bad analogy, but it's interesting. You like.
Is the first thing I thought of, but that's fair.
But it is just fascinating how it's so funny. You're bringing up a lot of, like, kind of past trauma that I had of, like, how do I grow this thing? Like, how how am I gonna sustain the excitement? Because I know that I'm a team of 1, and I remember driving around the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex to 8 jobs and, like, optimizing it in a day, and it's like, well, a meeting popped up, and I can't hit this one, and it is just interesting. But we also do see teams that, like, can own that and can scale that, which has been fascinating to learn from because they obviously are buying into the resources needed, whether it's hardware or personnel to support that. And just this kind of interesting dynamic now too of like the hardware supplementing the personnel with automated and like dock drone services and like how the dock is enabling more capture, which we'll get into, I'm sure, in a second too. But yeah, just fascinating to think of. I don't know. Do you want to go chop down the wood? Do you want to keep building a fire? Terrible analogy, but Jarvis, back me up here because that was maybe not my best one. But
I like the jingle idea, Grant. Julia, I've got a question for you. So, like when you got introduced and had breakfast with Fly Guys and kind of got over that mental hump of I don't have to do it all. Like, what sort of growth and what was the next hurdle that you encountered? Like, you had pilots available, you had all these resources. What was the next thing that you ran into, and how did you overcome that?
I think it was buy-in, now that I had, the keys to the kingdom and I could have all the data I needed of all types, I was my current barrier of entry was LiDAR. I couldn't get Black & Veatch to buy the LiDAR sensor that I needed, and Fly Guys already had it. So after that barrier of entry, it was a lot easier to just they were collecting like crazy, but then it was incumbent upon me to, "Okay, now I need these engineers to understand that it's accurate. I need them to take the time with me and validate according to their standards so that they know that my standards are mirroring theirs." So then my role completely pivoted from, you know, fleet management, pilot management, training, because I was the person training everyone. I'd go out and spend a week with a group of surveyors, leave them some drones, and be on my way to the next site. Or if there wasn't a surveyor, I'd be going and flying 14,000-acre sites, for 7 days or whatever. Kinda like Grant, jumping from 6 schools in a day because there weren't enough pilots. But then all this data, I had so much data and such little buy-in and access on the back end to say, "You have collected the most valuable data, and you're still referring to a buggy topo where a surveyor is putting a pole every 100 feet instead of a situation where you required us to have 2 centimeter accuracy and we have millions of points across your field." So that became a new conversation of, okay, you can view it in here, you won't have to have a new login. We can put it in Procore so that you're looking at drone deploy in Procore or, whatever scenario to just make it as few hurdles as possible for that end user to essentially bring it up on their Monday morning meeting and tell their subcontractors that they had a bust.
I definitely want to camp there for a little bit because I'm like looking up on the side here. I just saw a video recently of just like the entrepreneurial life cycle. I don't know if you guys have seen this or heard this, but it's just like this very interesting graph that like explains the kind of moments an entrepreneur goes through of like the excitement and like I got this, like we can do this. And it is kind of that first wave of like, and then I'm gonna go do it all by myself. And then you hit this trough of like, well, wait a second, like how do I get more people to be bought in on this? It actually is interesting to hear your kind of second hurdle to get over is the people side of it. Cause I feel like when it hits that, you're kind of met with this like, well, wait a second, maybe I wasn't expecting that now being a challenge on the relational side and the personal side of like, hey, like here's what you can do with this. Like, so yeah, I want to keep there for maybe a little bit. Like, what kind of categories have you seen that like really helps drive some of that engagement? Is it the true like one-to-one comparison of like, here's your like 4 or 5 steps that you're doing, and here's the new 4 or 5 steps? Like, walk us through like what tactics almost that you've seen kind of like work the most once you get to that phase of like how can I help you now see this and multiply the value that I've obviously been able to see?
Yeah, my 2 avenues are typically safety and cost. So if I'm in an industry where people are working at height, it's a pretty easy sell to say, "I don't you need a harness, I don't need a lift, I don't need at height," and I could legitimately save lives if you don't have to do that. At Black Beach specifically, for example, we didn't really have a ton of traction until we proposed it to the safety team through telecom to say, telecom specifically, for an example, those guys are working in towers at height that are incredibly dangerous, and I could do it in 10 minutes, what they were doing over hours and hours or a full day with a full group of people and rentals and, all those situations. So Like, that was a pretty easy sell in that scenario. Safety, I think, is always, it's not just a sell, it truly is saving lives in my personal opinion to not have somebody climbing a 400-foot tower. So that's one. Yeah, if you could show your ROI, you say that, one, if I'm quoting the whole job with the drone, in the cost, then I'm already paying for the entirety of the drone, even if the depreciation of the unit is over 3 years and my project is 6 months, so that's one benefit. But the other one is, just we do a lot of things old school in the field. So construction, for example, let's say I have a massive like mining site or large stockpiles. I might be counting trucks and trying to keep my subcontractors honest, and that can be very difficult. It's going to take daily meetings, and in the old school way, I might be, have a checklist and just all the different things on paper that are going to assist me. But if I can very quickly understand what my volume is and it exactly dial in that estimate, I'm getting cost savings on the front that are potentially holding people accountable that weren't previously by a number that they can see with their eyes. Additionally, with like for McCown Gordon, for example, our biggest bust was a large parking lot. I had mapped the site before we had started construction as a pre-con, flight. And after construction, the client came back to us and said, "You guys were responsible for all sorts of damage of our parking lot. You need to repave our whole parking lot," which was going to be a couple $1 million or something like that. And our response was to go back to the map and show them and say, "Hey, these cracks were pre-existing according to our map here. We're happy to do remediation work, and these are the things that we're responsible for." That was one of my first missions there, and that paid for 5 more drones. Just not having to pay that money to that client, not requiring that change order or not being, beholden to a scope that we weren't responsible for. It's just a huge covering for us, but also to inform them, on the front and back end to say your pre-existing conditions versus what happened after. After that, McCown Gordon decided that every single job site before it started would get a flight. So even if you weren't flying weekly or monthly like we all like to do, there was still always a baseline of, okay, we haven't touched anything yet. This is just to make sure that we're good, that the client knows where we started, and so we know where we're gonna end exactly what's changed.
Is it funny? I even you, like, sharing that story, just those, like, catalytic moments that, gosh, they feel so good, you know? And I when you go back and you're like, "Man, that one thing," and I feel like a lot of our listeners too probably, whether they have hit that moment of like, hey, that one story, that one person, that one project that, like, really did inflict the change of it, really taking off, pun intended, of like, yeah, just being able to go back and that's in your back pocket and the question that gets asked is like a pretty lofty one of, hey, like, yeah, it's reasonable to say that something might have been damaged, but to have it, oh man, there's no better feeling in the work side of it of like, oh no, I have something. Let me go back and show you. Not to like point fingers and just be like, yeah, like we told you, but yeah, just to know that you're a good business doing good business practices of, covering yourself and making sure that you're documenting it along the way. Yeah.
Yeah, and along the tune of good partnership, like, that was a school. We want to do our best that we possibly can for them, and, honesty and integrity is always at the forefront of everything. It makes it really easy for them to know that you're being above board with everyone when you show them in a picture. If a picture's worth 1,000 words, then a map is probably worth 10,000, it's a novel. So, giving them that saying, "We not only care about you so much that we're gonna be honest with you, but we're also gonna validate how honest we are with you because we understand that this is a messy world and that we're all just doing our best, but we want to double down on our stamp of saying, yes, we stand by this data. We believe it's accurate. We know it's accurate, and we're going to assist you in any way on the front end so that either way, we all know where we're standing so that there's no surprises at the end."
Yeah, I mean, well said. It just really removes the conflict almost like instantly. There's probably 3 or 4 workflows and outputs that can come as a result of that, but, yeah, it just dissipates very quickly, when you have that and you stay level-headed like you said. I think, yeah, very, very well said of like, hey, it just you build that level of trust, and it's helpful to show that and not just say it too. But Brian, any thoughts you wanna add?
Documentation done well just provides an unbiased view of reality. And, very often people see it as this thing to be weaponized, but in reality, it's just something to remove two people across the table from each other screaming because they have a misinterpretation of what they remember. And it's just easier to pull up a map and just kind of handle it that way. But yeah, no, I completely agree. I think the owner relationship I've only seen it benefit from great photo documentation. I've never seen somebody be angrier because they had too much information.
Yeah. I mean, well said. Jarvis, any thoughts you wanna add in? I'm gonna take us a little down a little different path, but before I do that hard right turn here, Brian, you know I like my blinkers.
No, I don't have anything to add. I thought that Brian's, finality notes on that were perfect. So take us hard right, Grant.
Hard right. Well, I wanna talk about your time at FlyGuys now, 'cause, this role of solutions architect, what's interesting, even as you were explaining it earlier, we've talked around a lot, I feel like, on this show and just offline too, of just these roles, you don't really get trained for them, right? Or, like, you can't like, if you wanna go, say you had a friend that's like, How do I do what you're doing, Julia? Like, how do I get into this?" You can't really, like, say, like, "Oh, well, just go to this course, or just go to this, university, or go, like, take these, like, classes." Like, I the solutions architect role, I think, is just so powerful because, 1, it obviously applies across different industries. We haven't unlocked that yet in this conversation of your work outside of even just construction, but just this idea of, like, what would you say to folks that, are interested in your role and obviously understanding a little bit more about what you're doing through this conversation, but, like, that they want to go and apply some of those things as well. Like, I think everyone who listens to here should have some form of solutions architecting at their own company, and even within their own teams or departments. But yeah, like, what would you say to folks that are encouraged by maybe that title or phrase, and how to get more educated on how to learn that skill set?
Yeah. I would say the number one vital skill that I am required to have in this role is communication and empathy. I need to be able to see it everything from everyone's side in order for us to all come to the same table and be able to execute. So in my experience, I think that, you have to have a really good understanding of the business and the data and the multiple sides, but more than anything, you're really just a translator. Like I see myself I have to take myself out of the fly guy's scope. I have to take myself higher level and say, okay, what does the industry need of me? What I see myself as the owner's rep of our clients internally. So I need to have their best interests in mind full time because like I said before, there's so many snake oil salesmen and there's so many gotchas and sales that could be happening here. A lot of like shiny buttons that you could be selling, but ultimately, none of those are worth anything unless the client is legitimately using it in their business and they're getting, you know, actual information out of it that they're going to be using on the flip side, not just imagery necessarily, but something that's more has more gravity to it. So I would say that the emphasis on this role is being able to extract myself out of the situation and say, okay, what exactly is this client asking for? They're not saying fly at 100 feet or this PPSM or this GSD. That I need to dig deeper into their intent and what they need. And I furthermore need to understand what tools they're already using and what's not going to cause friction in their workflow in their life. And then I can take myself back into the Fly Guys and say, okay, what's in my portfolio? What's in my deck? Because we stick with data centric only. We only collect data. We are not a software provider. We're not a processing. We're not a processing hub. We have partners like yourself because we would much rather have a Rolodex that we can offer to anyone and just stay in our lane of data collection. So I would say for anyone who's looking for a role like mine in this industry specifically, it's educating yourself from the multiple facets of the industry. You can't just be a one salesperson for one product, in my opinion. There's lots of variability that we need to be really honest about with our clients because not every tool is right for the job. And if we sell them the wrong tool for the right job, then they're gonna look at the rest of the industry and say, either it's a snake oil salesman, it's a gotcha, it doesn't have the same gravity or weight that we're anticipating. So I think it's incumbent upon the solutions architect to not be a sales minded person and to be completely on the side of the client to say, okay, I need to understand this client's needs so that I can truly fulfill their needs, not just as Fly Guys, your drone deployer, propeller, or anybody else out there, Esri or whatever. There's so many different levels. You could be a flight planner or a processor or any of those different layers. I think it's important for the person who's doing the solutioning to have a very broad mind and to really stay up on the times. New stuff is coming out all the time. I'm constantly in all the blogs and sorting through everything and calling my buddies. That, like you're saying, there's a really small industry. there's a lot going around, and it's good to continuously check the pulse that, "Hey, is this one real or is this not? Is this really gonna happen this year or is this 10 years from now?"
Mhm.
Um, that would be my advice.
Yeah, I mean, it's well said. Something that came up as you were explaining that is just this kind of new emergence of like user generated content of something back, call it 10 years ago when we were both getting into this space of really any YouTube video that was out there became the thing that you were most interested in, like, latched onto, like, who's trying this that they've tried it and maybe you can learn something from, but, I've seen a lot of and I think these are good, so let me just, like, pref by saying this. I've seen a lot of, like, companies like ours or others that have started to engage with, call it content creators of saying, "Hey, like, we want to show you or we wanna show this platform workflow to the masses. We can either pay you for that, or we can say, hey, like, in partnership with and giving you, access to our platform for free and stuff. Like, do you think that that is kind of changing the way people are educated too? Because not that it becomes bias if they obviously say like, who it's in partnership or if they got paid or if they didn't get paid. But like, yeah, I just feel like this new emergence of like content that's been created of just like an end user has been a source for me personally because I don't have access to every piece of hardware, when it's released and those kind of things. Like, do you see that as like a pro positive that is maybe in your kind of like learning camp of how you've educated yourself or continue to kind of stay up on times? Or is it like trending down a path of like, hey, like it can get really interesting because there's different, interests involved, and if they get paid, and if they like, I don't know, maybe just curious of your thoughts around that because that's something I've definitely found myself going to educate, as well on new things.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I can't lie, I'm definitely ingesting a lot of YouTube, a lot of user videos, a lot of unboxings, and I'll say that I'm definitely paying attention to when they're sponsored, paid, or unpaid. And there's certain ones that I consider more, credible than others that I definitely follow just for my own intention. But it also, even the ones that are clearly bought, I still think is educational.
Yeah.
Because I'm still getting the variables of the capabilities. It might be a little bit like boosted up, but I'm still understanding at the end of the day, like kind of what the means and methods are, or what the A plus B equals C is. And more than that, I'm learning potentially if they have like a little bit of underlying messaging or attitude or emotion towards it, I'm finding a lot of benefit out of that as well. So I think there's information we live in the information era, the age where everything is click and go. So I think that the more that's out there, the better. And honestly, access costs money. So being able to be partnered and granted is honestly probably the only way that most people would ever even see that type of data. So I think that there's like a two sides of that coin, but I absolutely think that more data on YouTube and readily accessible to the layman's out there, the pilots who maybe don't even know if they want to do it yet, is incredibly beneficial.
Any shout outs to people that you were like, "Oh, man, I watch their stuff all the time." Anyone that stands out that you're like, "Hey, they need more love, they need more attention because 'cause they're doing good work."
I would say that, Pilot Bite is really a good one. Dylan Gorman, I've,
Yeah.
gone out to a couple of his sites when he's been flying, definitely watched a lot of his videos, I don't wanna say all of them because I probably haven't, gone through some of his curriculum. I think he does a really good job of doing his due diligence and being relatively unbiased, doing his best to show the broad spectrum of the state of the industry. And when I'm with him in person, he's highly critical of all of them, which I appreciate. I think that that's the way that we should all be, even critical of ourselves, critical of each other. But the current state of affairs, I think we need to be excited about where we are, but we need to be highly critical about if we're not going to have as dialed in as, you know, structured of a future if we're not requiring more of ourselves at this phase.
Yeah, I think, authenticity is, something that is a very fine line that can often get, I don't know, I don't wanna say skewed, but yeah, you can definitely look through, some folks that you're like, "Oh, that just doesn't feel like, I guess authenticity is felt is maybe the best way to say it, of just, like, when you watch some content and become further educated around it, you can definitely tell the ones that are excited about it, have a passion for it, they want others to learn and grow and, be knowledgeable of it too, Brian, and maybe a good point to bring up too, like, just how much video content has really changed to help educate folks? Like, have you guys on the Fly Guys team used that as a medium to help more people? You talked about earlier, just like getting more data into more people's hands, what else they can do with this. Like, yeah, curious to hear kind of your guys' strategies on that side of it too. Of like, hey, we'll take care of the collection, call that half of the operation or however much of it you want to say, but educating more folks around that. Like, how have you guys maybe used that medium? We've talked about it with a few other guests that we've had on of just the value that that can bring of multiplying yourself and multiplying the stories that get captured out there? Like, how have you guys kind of seen that change? And obviously, your short time that you've been on that team, but I'm sure you've seen it in other capacities too before.
Yeah, actually, in the last 6 months at FlyGuys, we stood up a new department called Pilot Experience. So I guess I've talked almost entirely about the client side, but we really have two sides of clients. Pilots are our clients, and the end client who's requesting the data are also our clients because we have a network, a marketplace of 15,000 individuals. So a part of our emphasis for Pilot Experience is not only to generate that relationship, not just that we have about 100 to 200 people sign up every week. So we can't necessarily call every single person every single week, but we are doing our due diligence with that team to ensure that every single person has some type of touch point
Mm.
so that we understand, there's a survey and all these things that you fill out when you sign up, but there's, layers of that. We need to understand who these people are, what their intentions are, and so that we can best support them and put them on the appropriate jobs for them. So in that scenario for Pilot X experience, we've started a video series for the pilots specifically to most of the questions we get are about purchases. What should I buy to get more missions? What kind of tech do I need to invest in to get more? I want this to be my full-time gig. How do I do this? Most of our videos that we've started producing and that will be coming out in the next few months are purely focused on pilot centric, if this is the area you live in, this is what we're typically seeing in this area. You could purchase any of these things. These are what might benefit you in these different ways. This is might be the software that we could suggest, saying like you're flying a bunch of power poles or distribution lines. You might want to invest in a, drone harmony or something like that, or an automated flight for power poles or, different things like that. So we're trying to provide as much candid information and advice with some, discount codes to different vendors, whether it be equipment or software, just to get their foot in the door and just to give them our, candid advice saying, this is what we're seeing with our numbers. We're flying a lot of missions. There's 15,000 of you. This is the patterns we're seeing. We want to share this with you because this data it's helpful for us because we're a company and we're operating off of it. But we know it's so valuable for them to understand, I live in Iowa. What should I invest in? If I invest in an M3M, am I ever going to get a job here?
Mm.
And the answer is yes. Most likely you are if you're in Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas. But if I live in New Jersey, you probably are better with an M3E or an M3T or something like that.
Yeah, that's what about the other side or the
So
other?
for the client side, we're not producing a whole lot of videography for them at this time, except aside from our new partnerships that we're doing with software vendors. So, like I said, FlyGuys is a data centric, we're a reality data company. We're not the processing side, but we find partners like yourselves to help, be the experts in that space. So we have some different partners that we've been partnering with for the last, I want to say, 6 to 9 months. It's relatively new. And as we're rolling out those partnerships, saying, hey, if you select Fly Guys, you can also select Drone Deploy, and this is the way this flow goes. We're starting a video series to sort of introduce those to the clients so that they can see it on our YouTube channel and otherwise. We also are doing some education about our portal, like what scheduling with Fly Guys means. Why do you need a scheduler when you could just buy your own drone and do your own thing? What is the value that we offer? So there's some, internally about our process and who we are and what our product is as far as scheduling and otherwise. But it's definitely up and coming for sure on the client side.
Yeah, that makes sense. Man, 15,000 pilots. It's no small number. I mean, I can't imagine just the onboarding of them and the questions and elevating some of those things. Like, yeah, it's just a lot. And thanks for the Iowa shout out. I appreciate that. Yeah, if you're flying in Iowa, I'm sure you're gonna get a lot of good use out of that. I'm curious, like when you in your role from the solutions architecting side of it, like, do you feel like the education of how the data can be used will probably be one of the top 2 or 3 bottlenecks to see it actually, like, take off and, like, start to like because I feel like that's not just a skill, but it's also, like, something that kinda gets lost in the, like, bigger scheme of how more teams and how more projects and how more companies, like, are getting in on this, like, is education always gonna be the, like, least common denominator that it's like, "Hey, if you can focus on that, know that your time is not wasted. Know that your effort is not gonna be, like, overlooked because it is such an influential thing to, like, grow and scale." Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that it's probably gonna be the top my number one top. I think all of any of us service providers or software's top priority for a while. Because until reality data capture or drone or ground capture or otherwise is really seen as simple as taking a picture with your phone or as simple as, a surveyor or until it's baked into a general workflow, it's gonna be a hurdle and it's gonna be a battle. And you're not just dealing with, you're not just communicating with one person who's maybe the decision maker, but you also need that carrot to waterfall down to all the different individuals who touch that data. I think with the software getting easier, everything's getting more accessible. Everything's getting easier, simpler. The refinement of our data collection software, it's definitely gone up a lot. So I think that's a benefit. But I'm not sure that we're going to get away from. I think the education is probably the paramount item for us to focus on over the next 5 years while we see the software and hardware that rises to the top and is trustworthy and the other ones start to fall away. I imagine we'll have a lot of, people acquiring other people as they were kind of in this, flow state of new industry until there's a couple of names that people can just refer to, like, and I keep referring back to survey, until they can say, I've got a Trimble and it sounds really common to everyone, I think it's still going to be a little bit of an uphill battle. And I think another education component of that is also weeding through all of the political mess that has nothing to do with data capture. I focus only on data capture, what the best tool is, and what the best software backend is for individuals. I try very hard to stay out of the minutia of, well, what about bans or these things going on? Obviously, I'm very abreast of those situations and staying aware and have alternatives and scenarios. But ultimately, I think it's very important that we're still sticking with what we know is best and being completely transparent about all the scenarios by saying, "This is the best software, this is the best hardware, these are my advice, this is what we can do." Ultimately, we can do anything for you. So if you want, a blue drone with a tower that we're processing on a completely separate network, then and you wanna do that, that's fine. But how many people get to see that data? Will you actually be reviewing it and understanding, utilizing it? Or do we need a bridge, a gateway to some other solution that's really going to help, fold it into your workflow? Because again, no one's trying to do extra work here. No one needs to do extra work here. We don't want them to learn Civil 3D or learn some really complex, meta shape. Not everyone needs to be a GIS analyst. And it's becoming more attainable. So the more we show them that it's very attainable, very simple, and find those solutions that specifically resolve their personal problems, I think that, that's really the what I'm searching for.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, as you're saying that, all I keep thinking of is like, hey, if you're going back to your initial thoughts of like, if you're not a people person, if you really don't have any empathy and you really don't care about teaching other people about what's going on, hey, this may be your sign that this may not be the best path to go on. And that's hard. I mean, obviously you don't have to be an expert at all three of those. You obviously learn those skills as you go. I think we all have probably in some ways, but yeah, I mean, those are huge, like such critical components to it that I think the allure of what we do, and the excitement and the innovativeness of what we're all trying to kind of push forward in this industry is awesome. But behind the curtain, underneath the orchestra deck, like you don't see those things. And like, if you're okay with that being what helps make these things successful, then hey, like this is a great spot for you to be. But if not, man, it's gonna be really hard. And yeah, I think saying those things or having those kind of components is a big part of it too. Brian Jarvis, my quota is up pretty high, fellas. You haven't interrupted me here. I'm just gonna kind of keep going, but yeah, what do you guys got? Because I want to land the plane here and let Julia get back to architecting some solutions here for folks that
My my f my final question, actually, so in your previous 2 roles, you've always been on the inside, so there's never really been a reason for the people on your team to kinda question your, uh, I don't know, like, where your loyalty lies with because you're both getting paid by the same company. So now being on the outside, what topics do you tend to see being more difficult to kinda either get buy-in on, or is it just still are the hurdles regardless of what side you're on
Think
for like
that
internal education?
Yeah. And you're talking about, like, so when I'm on the client side, what are those hurdles?
Yeah, I guess more like with education on, I don't know, like I could see when I was on the inside of a GC, I would always talk about like accuracy. And now being on the software side, you're always going to get questioned like, oh, maybe they just want you to buy it, or like do you see like a trend of like the hardest topics to kind of get across for more of the client side?
Yeah, I mean, accuracy is probably a massive one just because there's levels of understanding that you need that are pretty tough to put in layman's terms sometimes. Because when we're talking about accuracy, there's relative and global, and digging into that with a group of people who are hearing about drone data for the first time
Yeah.
it may not land. So I would say a big barrier or something that I try to emphasize with my clients is definitely the accuracy conversation. Um, yeah, it's probably accuracy, I would say. I think that I camp a lot on what solution is right for them on the software side as well, just because we do have a portfolio of products that we can, call up folks like yourself and say, hey, we've got, this site and these people want to experiment. Can we do a demo? Um, I think that that's probably the biggest one is, like, convincing I wanna say convincing, but showing, revealing the capabilities that are truly as simple as we say they are and truly to the level of accuracy. I think that yeah, I'm gonna stick with accuracy. I think the most suspicious people I get are the ones who are either surveyors or engineers who have been burned before, and
Mhm.
they are very concerned about everything down from relative to global accuracy. So is I think I find that when I'm emphasizing that, and I have an amazing GIS team here who have masters in GIS, so they definitely are, beyond me on that education level. So typically they'll come in with all of the levels of data, and we'll kind of watch the shell shock look on their face, and then I say, okay, this is what this means as a consolidated, statement as best I can. But it's complicated. Accuracy is a complicated subject, down from hardware, software, all the way to end product. It's a multifaceted conversation that definitely needs love, in my opinion.
Man, it's crazy that very well said because you can ignore accuracy until it cannot be ignored, both in product and in practice and in people and in just the end result. And yeah, accuracy. Whew, well, lots to camp out on there. Maybe for a recap session too. But yeah, well said. Yeah, I very much agree with that. Jarvis, anything you want to ask before we close it out here?
Nothing to ask. Just for my closing. Thanks for joining us, Julia. It's been awesome. I as a fellow GC to engineer to tech side of things, it's been fun to listen to you and kind of resonate with things that you've had and different things that, yeah, I had that exact same struggle. So it's been fun to kind of have my personal feelings validated, my personal journey validated a little bit more. But yeah, looking forward to continue working with you guys and just yeah, thanks so much for your time and your insight.
Yeah, absolutely. Always a pleasure chatting with y'all.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I think what's fun is just to like when you talk about empathy, it's like sometimes empathy is best shared just in like shared experience of really all three of our, backgrounds of coming from a contractor, using or maybe now being in a little bit different role of the software side or the services. Yeah, empathy is best grown when you are around other people that can relate. And yeah, I very much appreciate your story, your path to where you've gotten, and obviously too, just staying connected and continuing to learn from you too, because that's another part that I think gets missed is, man, surround yourself, like you said on the GIS side, with experts and folks that know more than you or have been through different experiences to just give you an opportunity to ask questions or just like learn from them is such a skill that I think often kind of gets overlooked too. But Julia, we are very thankful for your time. It's fun to get to reconnect and talk through some of these things too. And yeah, anything that you would want to say just for folks on the Fly Guy side, if interested too, maybe being another conference moment, catalyst for you guys. But yeah, anything just to encourage you if you're not connected with Julia on LinkedIn, obviously go find her and have a chance. But yeah, anything before we close out?
No, I just want to say that I'm so pleased to be here. I'm so pleased to work with you all. I think it's so paramount again that we're all just staying connected, staying friends. It doesn't matter if we're competitors or not. It's not a zero sum game out here. There's so much industry and so much education to be had. So just like you're saying, like, keep reaching up. Anytime I found my ceiling with drones, if I found that I was the only person in the room who knew what I was talking about, I try to get out of that room as soon as possible. I think we have a lot of self-made experts in this industry, rightfully so, but also we need to stay super humble keep that integrity. And like I said, empathy, understanding where someone else is coming from is really the only route into their home, their heart, their mind. So understanding from their perspective is really the only way that we're going to be able to work together. And, instead of doing this, with each other, we need to be unified as an industry because the other industries are looking at us to say, okay, what can you do for us? Are we suspicious of you or are we excited to have you? And it's incumbent upon us to show them that we are do have the best interest of their industries in mind. We are trying to find the best solutions. We're not where we're going to be in 5 years, but the internet didn't exist at some point either. Everyone was reading, Britannica books. At some point, we phased out the Britannica, Encyclopedia Britannica, and we're not trying to phase it out, but we're definitely trying to level everyone up to the simplest version of what they can do with their reality data capture to have a true impact on what they're already doing. Not adding something, not changing something, but really just improving what they already have. I'm happy to be here. I'm so jazzed to be in this industry and with such good people. So
It
yeah, that's all.
well said. It was very clear even before we hit record. Yeah, just your excitement, what you're doing on the team. It's really cool and it's just contagious. So yeah, I encourage you to keep sharing your story, keep connecting with folks. We obviously feel fortunate to have a little bit of part of that in this kind of time as well. But Julia, this has been great. Thank you for staying with us, sharing some insights. I know some really great things to pull and share with others. So appreciate the time. If you're not connected with Julia, go find her on LinkedIn. Go connect with the Fly Guys team, doing some great stuff. Really thankful for you and the team and appreciate your time.
Likewise.
Awesome. Thanks, team. Take care. We'll see you on the next one.